How you like that, boys?
That's big time, Tommy.
Big time. Hey, don't let me play with the sit in a room and play with all the stuff we've got access to too much. Welcome into an Inside Carolina live reaction show. Shout out to the folks filling into the room. Shout out to Greg Barnes and Sherrell McMillan for joining the chat. Sherrell, let me show you something before we get started. They can be yours for a cool, we'll say a grand. Greg Barnes, I'll start with you since Sherrell's fixing his technical stuff. Armando Bacot returns for another season. It's funny, I heard Drew Timmy had the opportunity to come back, and I said, good Lord, he's been there forever. Same class as Armando Bacot. We'll see what Timmy does. Bacot elects to come back. What's your thought?
Well, that's like Kihei Clark, right? Everybody talk about how long he was at Virginia, and yet he's younger than Leaky Black. So, uh, number one, I think that kind of shows you that while some people have issues with the whole COVID year, North Carolina has greatly benefited. Whether it's Brady and Nance and Leaky, of course, and now Armando, it's been a good thing for the Carolina program. But look, anytime you can get somebody back of Armando's stature, you happily welcome him back. I mean, this is a guy who was runner up to ACC Player of the Year last year. He was third in line for ACC Player of the Year this year. He was preseason ACC Player of the Year, All America type. Um, he's one of the best rebounders in ACC history. We know about the success that he had last year with all the double doubles, and he's a good ambassador for the program. And I think just the fact that he's willing to come back, he may have been limited in terms of what he could have done otherwise, but he's such a cornerstone piece for this program. When you got somebody of that talent, of that ability to kind of work around, you're going to be in really good shape. And so I think that's a home run for Hubert Davis and trying to construct this 2023 or 2022. Well, I'm getting my years mixed up. 2023, 2024 roster set up to be able to compete once again.
Somebody in the chat said, welcome to 97. I guess that was my fancy countdown I threw up there. But Sherrell, it does feel like 2022. Armando Bacot has announced his return to North Carolina. Your take on what Greg had to say about the importance of having a guy like that coming back? I mean, that's a pretty big recruiting hit for Hubert Davis.
Yeah, it's weird because there's been kind of this thought process in the fan base that, well, maybe it's time to move on, and maybe you need to let some the younger guys who are left play some. And it's like this is a first team All ACC, each of the last 2 years, third team All American each of the last 2 years. The As Greg said, all time leader in double doubles and all time leading rebounder. You can't go find that in the portal. You can find a lot, but you can't find that. And especially one who's been, to Greg's point, such a great ambassador for UNC for so long. It's funny because I remember Hunter Dickinson, the center at Michigan. We interviewed him because UNC had offered him, in high school, and he was like, "Yeah, they're telling me that, Armando wants to be one and done, and so that's why they're kind of looking at me." And it's like, here we are, 4 years later, and both of those guys could be in college next season. So to Greg's point, it just shows the how things have changed. Folks who didn't like NIL, this is a good thing, I think, for UNC. I would venture to say that without NIL, Armando Bacot would not be coming back this season to use his COVID year. So you have to look at everything as a whole and say, North Carolina checked the box as far as getting Bacot back. And that's kind of the start of a positive postseason because it has been quite a 10 days for them. So this is maybe the start of the positive momentum.
Absolutely. You mentioned NIL. I'd venture that those guys weren't back last year if there wasn't NIL. So it certainly has its positives. I think North Carolina's benefited a great deal from the NIL deal. But Sherrell, sort of break down the process here a little bit. Of course, folks listening know I'm going to say Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com and the 10% discount you get from being an Inside Carolina premium subscriber. And this last 10 days is worth its weight in gold from Sherrell's scoops and all that going on the boards. But sort of give us a 10,000-foot view of Bacot's decision to come back, and the process getting to today, March 22nd, it being announced.
Well, honestly, we'd heard probably 4 or 5 weeks ago that this was the likely outcome. And there were, I think, a variety of factors when it comes to that. We talked about NIL, but also the way the season ended. I think if you looked at his interview after the Virginia game, a lot of folks thought, man, maybe that's it because this guy looks tired. I think more so than anything, it was that he didn't really want to go out that way. So when you combine the fact that we can be honest, he's not really an NBA prospect at this point. So combine that with the ability to make money from his name, image, and likeness with the way the season ended. And I think this was a natural result. After the season ended, a lot of guys, it was spring break, so a lot of players went away to kind of just get away from everything because they've been in a grind really since late September, with maybe a few days here or there away from basketball. So just to reset, retool, rethink, meditate, do whatever they need to do. They came back this week, and Bacot had his meeting with Armando Bacot. Excuse me, Hubert Davis had his meeting with Armando Bacot, I believe, on Monday, and that's when the final decision was made and announced today.
You got to love when you got to block somebody using your name, Sherrell. I'll listen to you talk every day. And by the way, that's not my screen name in YouTube, so you're blocked. Greg, to the point Sherrell made about being not wanting to go out that way. I mean, he's spoken to his love for the university. He said, "I die for this university," all that stuff. That's a big deal to make a lot of money to come back, but also to not go out in one of the worst ways, worst seasons we've seen for Carolina basketball for a guy like Bacot, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of go back to Roy Williams. If you listen to his retirement press conference, one of the things that he said was the 2020 year was not going to be his last year as head coach. He was not going to retire that year because of how poorly it went. That team, even though there was not an NCAA tournament, that team was not going to get an invite. They were not going to get an invite to the NIT either. And so that was not an option. And that's that kind of resonates with what Armando's talked about. And I think that's important because they had such high hopes for last year. And the weird thing about last year is, we've talked about this before, is that by the time the team got to Portland, I think we all kind of had an idea that, all right, it's almost like they're just slogging along, and it never really got better. So I'm curious to see, next year if Armando is able to build off that as a team leader, to be like, look, guys, we had a great run 2 years ago. We were 20 minutes away from the national title, and we just kind of stuck it in the mud the following year. Let's not do that again. Let's be better than that. And I think with him, his stature, both physically and just his presence overall, in terms of what he's accomplished and what he means to the program, I think he's a guy that can be that leader to say, we are not going down that road again. We are going to be better. And you learn from shared experiences, and you learn from hard times. And that's what this past year was. And so I think he really has the opportunity to kind of cement himself as this grand Tar Heel player with how things play out next year. Because look, as we've seen this week, there's going to be a lot of new faces in Chapel Hill. So you need a guy like Armando to kind of pull everybody together.
Sherrell, last year, sort of Bacot coming back and the guys filtering back, it was sort of a building process. One comes back, they all decide to come back. I think it's a little different this year. Can you sort of speak to, we know Puff Johnson, and I'll freely admit, I was a little surprised Puff Johnson decided to leave, but I can't blame him at all. Guys want to play. But you also have to stay healthy to be able to play, and that was an issue for him. But as far as a domino effect, Sherrell, is there anything like that going to happen with this situation? A lot of people still asking about Caleb Love. RJ Davis's decision officially is still out there. So what's that process going to be like, you think, over the next, however many days?
I think the dominoes are more likely to fall from the transfer portal than they are from the current UNC team. And that's just because, as you see right now, so obviously McCoy, Nichols, Styles, and Johnson have all gone. It's interesting; those are all the same position, essentially. So they're all gone. So that's four scholarships, that have become open that they didn't expect because Leaky and Nance's scholarships are covered by the high school players, Simeon Wilcher and Zayn High coming in. So they have four open spots, and you would think, if R.J. Davis were to return or Caleb Love were to return, along with Bacot, that it I don't want to say it'd be easy, but guys would want to play with experienced, well-known players who have shown they can compete and play at the highest level, in the Final Four in a national championship game. So I think that would be very attractive. And in my personal opinion, I think Bacot maybe wanted to wait a little bit longer to announce this. I think with the way the week is gone, that they needed, similar to what Drake May did, they needed to show, okay, he's coming back, so that the guys in the portal knew that. And so now that Carolina can go out and recruit and say, hey, we got to, who else can say they have a third team All American big, consecutive years, first team All ACC big coming back in the middle. So I think that is where you see kind of the domino effect more so than on the current team. And plus, as we all know, Bacot has a big personality and he's pretty well liked. And there are a lot of players who would want to, play with someone like that.
Yeah, he's already been recruiting. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, Rel, I'm not sure how much you can speak to this. So be as honest as you can be in terms of protecting sources and all that. Do we have any kind of understanding at this point in time what has led to the departures? And what I mean by that is this players saying, "Hey, it's a playing time issue. I need to move on," or is this the coaching staff saying, you, "We have some things in mind. This is what we expect from the position," and maybe there was a little bit of a parting of ways from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think most of these have been the latter. I think we talked about introspection and self awareness and tough conversations. I think it was after the Virginia game. We talked about that, which turned out to be their last game. And I think all that has happened here over the last 12 days. And I think as a result of those conversations, you're seeing who's making moves and who isn't. So I think you can kind of glean from that kind of what those conversations entailed.
Good. And I want to remind our listeners, if you haven't followed along with the football side of things, there is a direct parallel here. And Mac Brown, who is a Hall of Fame head coach, so he can speak openly about this probably a little bit easier than Hubert can. He's been very clear, whether it be in the summer, they even do it during an open week in the season. Well, they will talk with the players and make it abundantly clear that, hey, these are our expectations. This is what we think you can provide. This is what you're providing. We need to know what you think, just so everybody knows what the playing field looks like. So nobody's surprised. And if players don't fit and it just doesn't work out anymore, well, those are the guys that leave. And it's a very common thing in football. And Max talked about, especially with the portal opening up and NIL as well. It's even more so now. But you're looking at, for North Carolina, I don't know what the final number was, but like 15 to 20 players leaving. I mean, that's a massive amount of attrition, 20, 25%. And it's commonplace on the football side of things. We've never really seen it in basketball, especially at North Carolina. But again, the portal's been open a couple years. NIL just got started. Not that this is the new norm, but when there's going to be so much action in the portal in terms of roster building, maybe don't be so surprised and maybe understand that this is part of the process moving forward.
What, Tommy, and people are gonna get upset with me because I'm about to say this, but what interests me is that, I think I include myself, the fan base, people who cover the team. What have we talked about for like 5 months? That this was not a good basketball team, and there needed to be changes, and there need to be introspection and all that. Well, this is what that looks like, and it's kind of, I want to call it the dirty side of things, but it's reality. That's where college sports are now, in that you have to have these conversations because everybody essentially is a free agent. And so you have to recruit your guys, and then if you want to keep them, you have to re-recruit them. If you don't want to keep them, you have to massage it in a way such that it doesn't hurt you in future recruitments. And then you have to always be looking at the portal. In the NFL, they have what's called the pro scouting department, and their job is completely to look at other teams and find players that they may like, just in case they become a free agent, if they're released or whatever. We're not quite there in college basketball, but we're not far away either, because you have to do that because, as Hubert Davis has said, this is speed dating, and it moves most of the time very, very quickly once players enter the portal. Half of them, once they enter the portal, already have a destination in mind, but that's a completely different story. So these are the necessary steps if you want a team that didn't perform well. You have to kind of change some of the parts, and Hubert Davis has to more mold it in his own image, and I think that's what's happening now.
Yeah, and as the fan base kind of works through this process, and you got your people blaming Hubert Davis, you have people protecting Hubert, and one of the things that I've had some conversations with people on the boards about lately is this whole idea that at the end of the day, how North Carolina performs is on Hubert Davis. It's not on the players at all. I mean, Hubert and his staff are making millions of dollars. The players are not. The coaching staff decides who actually plays. And so the idea that it's the players who are to blame here in terms of how the season goes, it doesn't work that way. It's on the coaching staff. So what that means is it's on the coaching staff to field a product that is successful. And as Rel just said, if you go through a season like Carolina just had, and you see that it's not working the way you want it to work, get players in that'll do it. Change the roster. Now, you have to be careful with how you do it, because you don't want it to blow back on you on the recruiting trail. And that's what Max talked about. You have to be very open and honest with these kids. And look, if we go through this the right way, we're going to help you find somewhere else to play. We're going to be your advocate. Just because it didn't work out here doesn't mean we're going to leave you high and dry. So there's a way to kind of work through that. That's not harsh. But that's what this is about. Hubert Davis understands things have to get better. And if he doesn't have the guys on his team that he thinks can make that happen, he's got to get other guys on roster that can make that happen. It's that simple.
Sherrell, let me ask you real quick before I take a couple questions from the chat and from the message boards. We sort of hit on it the other day. This kind of been flipped, right? They had a season last year and made a strong run, and then this is the transition season, if we want to call that. Folks forget, and folks are talking about in the chat, why did they recruit these players that aren't playing and all this and that, and that aren't any good or whatever. Well, it's a new coaching staff too, and it's a new style of play and all that. So fit and all that kind of thing. But as far as transitioning, I think the transfer portal for Hubert Davis and for college basketball, especially new coaches, it'll be the same with Rick Pitino. The transfer portal is huge for them. Is huge, can make or break a new coach or a new coach with a new team. And I think that's what we're seeing here. That's one I want you to comment. And two, somebody on he who wears Carolina blue on the message board said, why isn't he taking his time? But then why hasn't he already gotten the commitment? So I think he's joking there, but this is a speed dating process, but they also have to do their due diligence, right?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in a military family, and the military motto is "hurry up and wait." So that's pretty much what this is that you contact these guys, you talk to them, you have meetings with them, but you're always looking to see who else might be in the portal, because there could be somebody better. And that's why this whole thing is kind of like it's very messy, and it's hard, I think, to do and to manage. And some of the coaches who have mastered it, you're seeing them succeed. I think about Eric Musselman down in Arkansas has mastered the portal. The coach at Alabama, he's done pretty well in the portal, even if he's pretty poor at a lot of other things. So for Hubert Davis, I think they've identified it. Let me take a step back. I know people will say, well, this player, was a bust, or this player X was a bust, or player Y was a bust. I think the better way to judge these things is to look at the plan. Say, what was Hubert Davis's or the UNC staff's plan entering this cycle from the transfer portal? Last year, it was they need some help beside Bacot, someone who can, play with him and also back him up at the 5. I think they hit a, I don't call it a home run, but they met their objective with the plan last year. Same thing the year before. It was they need stretch bigs. Stretch bigs is the new position, and they signed Justin McCoy. That didn't quite work out. They signed Brady Manick. Obviously, that was a home run. At the time, Dawson Garcia was a home run as well. So I think their plan has been sound each year entering the portal. It's just like recruiting. You're never going to bat, above 500 really. But the plan has been sound, and I think that's what you're going to see this year is just judge the plan. And right now, the plan is to go out and get, starter quality players who want to come in and play with Armando Bacot and potentially, other guys returning from the backcourt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating, and there's a lot of questions about playing the bench and doing this and that and all, and that's going to be a thing. They've got to get some depth. Greg, when you look at that, I know you've been huge on this as far as the messaging and the process that Hubert's gone through, and maybe we're seeing some of that fruit or bad fruit with guys leaving, but how much of an evolution process have you seen or would you expect to see or do you hope to see here when you go through this? It's like when coaches go through a rough patch, they change or they realize they've got to do something different. Do you see that or foresee that, or are we still too early sort of in the Hubert Davis era, realm, whatever you want to call it?
I think we're at the point where we're starting to see a little bit of an adjustment, which was necessary. Tommy, you highlighted it on, I think, on the beat a week or two ago. But Hubert has started making some comments about maybe he didn't handle things as well as he could have. And that's really the first we've heard of that. That's growth. That's progress. That's part of the deal. And the same kind of goes here. You having those tough conversations because really we didn't see it last year. And last year is kind of a unique thing where they were an 8 seed, so they didn't really have a great year, and then they got hot at the right time. And I'm sure as a first-year head coach, you're thinking, well, maybe it just all clicked, and we don't have like major issues that we have to address. And that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think the fact that he's really kind of jumped into it and he's had these hard conversations, and we're seeing some roster movement. I don't think how you address that as anything other than growth and progress, and that's part of it. And we've talked about how you're going to have to get into year 3, year 4, maybe in year 5 to have a really good handle of what Hubert Davis as a head coach is, because he's never been a head coach before. He's 2 years in now, not even 2 years in. He'll be 2 years in 10 days, and so it's just a part of the process. I do think. When we talk about the bench component, you can, and this is me speaking from my perspective, and I like to know both of your guys, both of you, your perspectives on this. But I really think as you navigate the NIL and the transfer portal era, there has to be a balance. It's good. North Carolina, I think it's done a pretty good job the last 2 years. When you have specific needs, you go in the portal and you make your team better. But if you're going in the portal to get 4 guys or maybe 5 guys, that's probably a little much. There has to be some development. And we've talked about it before, but if you go back to Duke 7, 8 years ago, they really got into a situation of all their experienced talent, guys who came up through the program, had kind of aged out. And so all you saw was this vicious cycle of all these one and done guys. And you really didn't have any older guys to help them along. And it was a problem. Quinn Cook, without him, they probably don't win the title. And they really haven't done anything since. And so it's a little bit different now, but it's still kind of the same idea. If you keep going back to the well that is the transfer portal and you're bringing in guys for 1 year, well, you're not really developing that talent because you don't have to. So I think there has to be a good mix where you need to be able to develop high school recruits to balance things out, but also understand we're going to use the portal to make us better for the upcoming year.
I think your point about that, and that's the two-edged sword, right? Is I don't have to develop them because I can go get them. Well, then what happens if you don't get them? You have a bad year, and you might be on your couch somewhere. And Bull Hill asked in the chat, do guys stick around long enough to be developed? I mean, that's another part of it. Sherrell, your take on that aspect of it, and then I kind of want to circle back to Bacot. And also, there's a lot of questions about reclassifications in the chat. I would point them to the premium message boards. But Sherrell, your take on development versus portal?
Well, I think if you look at this situation in isolation, what it shows is that last year, after the run, or I guess we have to say 2 years ago now, or the end of the season before last, after the run, they all decided to run it back. And I think was that this year was going to be the rebuild where they were going to have to go heavy into the portal, and they were going to have to sign a big high school class to fill all the spots of all the guys that we anticipated them losing after the Final Four run. So really, everything just got delayed in a sense. So this is kind of Hubert Davis's first off season where he has full, I don't want to say autonomy, but full control of what the roster will look like. Because last year, no one was going to say, "Oh no, you can't have all these guys back," after they just, went down to the wire in the national championship game and had the run that they had. So there was not a chance to do this last year because everybody wanted to run it back, and rightfully so. As we said before, I think you take that all day. So now we're seeing kind of the restart or rebuild or remodel, whatever phrase you want to use, of Carolina basketball in the way that Hubert Davis sees it. So I think that should be considered when you talk about the attrition. Maybe it won't be 4 or 5 every year. It'll be more like 2 or 3. And so if it's 2 or 3, then you have, 7 or 8 guys coming back and maybe a 2-man recruiting class, and you don't have to look for 1 or 2 guys in the portal. So I think this year is slightly abnormal just because it's the first real offseason where the entire team isn't coming back, absent Kerwin Walton. So, I don't think it'll be 5 or 6 guys every single year because that's, to Greg's point, that's not sustainable. I think it'll be closer to 2 or 3. And then you have the high school guys who can build. But you have to keep them happy. You do have to play them because if you don't, they will leave, as we've seen.
Yeah, guys will leave, and nobody can be blamed for leaving. They've got a finite time that they can play college basketball or play basketball, and you don't want to spend it sitting on the bench. Let's circle back to Bacot, and you're listening to a live reaction. Armando Bacot returning for another season at North Carolina, just stacking records on records from North Carolina. Sherrell, well, no, I'll give Sherrell a break since he just talked. Greg, I'll come to you. Bacot's got to improve when he comes back. I mean, I said it a lot this past season that I didn't see a lot of guys get a whole lot better than the year before. And quite frankly, Bacot might be one of those or is one of those. How can he get better and improve to help this team more? Without question, he's a dominant rebounder when he's healthy. Without question, he can score posted up and all, but that's not really the way anymore. What do you think about Bacot's improvement and what he needs to do personally to be good next year on this team, regardless of who's around him?
Yeah, well, we've talked for years about Bacot needing to establish an outside shot, and that's primarily been for his pro hopes, right? Even if it's not in the NBA, maybe overseas. But I think being able to knock down just a free throw jumper consistently would go a long way in terms of helping to open up the offense a little bit. I think the key thing for Armando is he's got to be healthy. He's really banged up. Probably the second half of this past season, we all know what happened in this early tournament, and he's had kind of random injuries throughout his career. So he needs to be able to stay healthy. I think first and foremost that really helps. But then I think early in the year he was doing a better job of kind of passing out of double teams. And then kind of, I don't know if the injuries played a role or what it was, but later in the season, he started having some issues with it. And I know, I guess it was against Virginia when Hubert was talking about Not only is he getting double teams, but he's not even getting the ball close to the basket. He's 3 steps out from the block. That's not very productive for the offense or for Armando. He's got to be able to establish position on the block. When he does that, he demands attention from the opponent. And at that point, as soon as the ball goes into him, if he's not making a quick move or he's got people collapsing on him, he's got to get rid of the ball quickly. And I think him just doing those couple of things quicker and having much more of a instinctual reaction, that'll go a long way in improving the offense. But just too many times we saw him kind of get bogged down. And if you're double teamed and you're not able to kind of get rid of it, and if you do get rid of it, you're not throwing a crisp pass and it kind of delays the offense and having to reset. Those are problems. And we saw a lot of that in the half court. So those are just some very basic things, I think, that would help the team get better by Armando getting better in those categories.
Yeah, Tony Dowd in the chat mentioned DJ Burns. I love that dude's game. Give me some of that all day. If Bacot learned those moves and those post moves and that bully ball. Sherrell, your take there. I mean, Bacot's talent's obvious, but his limitations are obvious. I'm surprised he hasn't changed the form of his jump shot or his set shot over the past 3 years, but that's another question for somebody smarter than I am. But your take on what he needs to do going into next year.
I'm going to read you something, Tommy. This is from November 12th, 2022. If those who remember, that's the Calls of Charleston game. This is Armando Bacot. He said, quote, "I've got to remember, like Coach told me the other day, I'm not a CEO. I'm a high-end janitor. I mean, it's the truth. I'm not the most talented guy. I've got to go out there and fight, and that's what I've got to hang my hat on. So that's what I need to go do, be a janitor." So I would tell Armando Bacot to remember those words and just consistently be a janitor. Because I think at times after he got banged up, in addition to buying some really strong ankle supports, there were times this season where I don't think he played with that mentality. Now, the reasons for that, it could be a ton of them. He could be tired. He could be hurt. It could be the way they're defending him. And that gets old after a while when you have 4 guys just around you at all times. But I would just remind him that that is who you are. I think that game he had maybe 1 or 2 points in the first half, a couple of rebounds, and he finished with like 27 and 14 or something. So just kind of bottle that. You're the high-end janitor. That's what you said you were. That's what Hubert Davis has told you were. So remember that and try to play that way, because North Carolina can be at its best when he does that.
We got Ted Lasso saying be a goldfish, and we got Hubert Davis saying be a janitor. I love it.
It's you know what I'm gonna say? Be a junkyard dog out there. I mean, when I've watched the NCAA tournament and watched those teams, they've got them. They're loaded with them. We mentioned transfer people. Kansas State playing 5 transfers. Jim Larinaga down at Miami loading up on transfers. Steve Forbes at Wake Forest. So Hubert Davis has got some mining to do, but he gets Armando Bacot a pillar of the offense. He needs some shooters around him because we've seen that when he has those shooters, Sherrell, he's got space to work. When he doesn't have shooters, man, it's like cement blocks down there in the paint. Closing words for you before we get out of here, Sherrell.
I would just say it's a good day for North Carolina, and I know the fan base just hasn't felt that way. Really, gosh, when's the last time the fan base felt good? Maybe the home win against Virginia in February. So it's been quite some time, but this is good news, and this is the equivalent of a top 10 5-star, essentially one and done recruit if you think about it, because it's got 1 year left. So this is a huge get for UNC, even if it was expected. This changes. I had a friend of mine who was playing with our Bartovic kind of win predictions, and Bacot alone with the current roster switched UNC from the number 53 team to the number 32 team. So one player in whatever metric formula that Bartovic uses changed Carolina by 31 spots. So, I mean, this is a huge, huge deal for UNC. And like we said, I think he'll help UNC attract really good players.
Indeed, and he works the social media doing just that. Greg, anything left, or are we going to let it hang with Sherrell?
Yeah, I've got something, and this is probably a bigger podcast later on. But just hearing some of the comments this past week from what's the coach at K-State? Tang?
Yeah.
Jerome Tang.
Jerome Tang. But he made the comment about Kentucky about, the program guys, the big time players at Kentucky were not coming back, and that's just a matter of having more dogs. When I wrote my column last week, kind of criticizing the decision not to play in the NIT, local radio crew did a segment kind of on my column, and they disagreed. And one of the reasons they disagreed is they said with the transfer portal and NIL, the program concept was going away, and that each year was new for every team. And so there was no difference between NC State and North Carolina anymore. Well, I disagree with that. I think there's a long history of what Carolina basketball is about, the Carolina family, and that's something worth fighting for. The challenge for Hubert Davis is that Roy Williams didn't want anything to do with handlers and agents and NIL and the transfer portal. And he tabbed Hubert Davis as the guy to lead this program into this new era. And that's a tough task because Hubert's having to learn on the fly, and it's very difficult. But the challenge really in terms of the Carolina program and the Carolina family is how do you blend those two things? And I don't know the answer to it whatsoever, but Hubert's got to be able to figure out that, hey, we're going to have these guys coming in for maybe 1 year at a time as transfers. And we're going to have freshmen coming in who, once we get them on campus, we realize, hey, that's not the fit we thought they were. So we need to help them move on. Well, that's not the traditional way of how North Carolina has done it. But North Carolina didn't have to do it that way. This is the new time. So how does he marry kind of the idea and the core beliefs of that Carolina program with the modern era? And I think that is a very tough task. He's going to need a lot of help with that. I think a lot of coaches have kind of struggled trying to determine how to do that. As I said, I certainly don't have the answer. But I think as we get further along, we start hearing some of these comments about, hey, programs don't matter anymore. It's a 1 year deal because you can stock up with 5 transfers and you can be really good very quickly. And it's just a changing world. And how Hubert's able to connect the past with the future may be his toughest challenge moving forward. And that's very important for the fan base. I know it's very important for Hubert as well.
I love Tang's comment about the name on the jersey, on the front of the jersey, doesn't mean as much anymore because the past don't matter, something to that effect.
Yep.
And I agree. You got to get up and play. And North Carolina saw that it's not just rolling the ball out this year, and which I think they assumed it would be. That's been this podcast, Live Reaction. A lot of folks are asking in the chat. There's a Ian Jackson update from Sherrell on the premium message board right now on the Inside Carolina Premium message board. If you're not a member, you got to get a member to get that information. All that reclass stuff, all the recruiting class. I see the tweet folks are referencing. Go check out the premium boards. Check out Coast to Coast podcast with Joey, Sherrell, and Sean Moran. Greg Barnes and I will be back next week. Greg, I got a next level idea for you. We'll talk about later. But that'll be it. Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. And if certainly support us, support them, take care of them. They got all your needs. It's been the Inside Carolina Live Reaction. Armando Bacot returning yet again for North Carolina in 23-24. Until we do the next one of these, folks, we'll see you soon.